The laughter in the courtroom was a vile, thunderous roar, a cacophony of mockery that bounced off the pristine marble walls and seeped into every corner of the small-town courthouse. It was the kind of laughter designed not just to humiliate, but to break someone from the inside out. 3 officers stood near the defense table, their arms folded across their chests, their expressions dripping with contempt and arrogance. They weren't just laughing. They were basking in their perceived victory, reveling in what they saw as the ultimate humiliation. The ringleader, Officer Hank Maddox, stepped forward with a swagger that bordered on theatrical. His uniform was crisp, his chest puffed out, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights as if it were a weapon in itself. With a cruel grin plastered across his face, he leaned in close, his voice a mockery of sympathy. "Look at this," he chuckled, glancing over his shoulder at his fellow officers. "She actually thought she could come in here and fool us. Thought she was somebody important, but at the end of the day, she's just another one of them. Another liar, another fraud, another criminal who thought she was untouchable." The second officer, Mark Rollins, laughed under his breath, shaking his head in agreement. "Yeah, they're all the same. Always playing victim. Always acting like the world is against them. But we know the truth, don't we?" Their voices were designed to pierce, to belittle, to drag her dignity through the mud. The woman standing before them, her wrists still in handcuffs, had been silent throughout the entire ordeal. She sat with her hands resting on the wooden table, her knuckles white from gripping the edges. Her body was tense, every muscle coiled as if preparing for an onslaught. Yet her expression remained calm, her eyes focused and unwavering. She had endured every insult hurled her way, every snide remark, every condescending snicker. They had dragged her into the courthouse like a criminal, shoving her into the defendant's seat with all the gentleness of a predator throwing its prey to the ground. But even as the minutes crawled by, she hadn't uttered a single word in her own defense. Not because she was weak, not because she was afraid, but because she was waiting. The third officer, Brian Carter, joined the chorus of laughter, his amusement shining brightly in his smug expression. "You had so much to say when we caught you, all that pleading, all that righteous talk about justice and rights. And now you're just standing there looking pathetic. Guess your fancy words only work when someone's stupid enough to listen." Another round of laughter erupted from the back of the courtroom, where a few more officers sat, arms folded, their eyes glinting with malicious pleasure. They had come for the show, and they were not disappointed. To them, this was entertainment, a statement, a lesson to be taught and learned. But what they didn't understand was that lessons had 2 sides. The woman took a slow, measured breath, her chest rising and falling with a calmness that seemed impossible under the circumstances. And then she spoke. Her voice was cool, controlled, and edged with steel. "You might want to watch your tone, officers, because in just a few minutes, I'll be the one deciding your future." Silence. The air grew thick and heavy, the room's temperature dropping as if her words had sucked the warmth straight from the air. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The smirks faded, their amusement melting into something closer to confusion. And then, finally, the ringleader, Hank, forced a laugh, but the sound came out strained and hollow. "What the hell are you talking about?" Hank sneered, his arrogance momentarily fractured by the shadow of doubt creeping into his eyes. The woman straightened her back, rolling her shoulders like someone shedding the weight of the world. The handcuffs clinked softly as she shifted them, the metal scraping against her wrists in a subtle but deliberate movement. When she spoke again, her words were slow and precise, like the slicing edge of a blade. "I said, you might want to watch your tone. Because this courtroom, this place you think you control, it's mine. And the only criminals standing here today are the ones who have been laughing." A murmur rippled through the gallery. People who had been watching the scene unfold with varying degrees of fascination and horror suddenly leaned forward, their eyes wide with curiosity and suspicion. The judge, who had been sitting silently behind the bench, His eyes narrowed in scrutiny, cleared his throat, and gestured for the bailiff to approach. The bailiff, an older man with kind eyes and a steady demeanor, nodded briskly before stepping toward the woman and unlocking her handcuffs with a soft click. Hank's face twisted in confusion, his composure crumbling with every second that passed. No, this has to be some kind of joke. She was caught. She was resisting. We had probable cause. That's enough, Officer Maddox. The judge's voice was sharp and commanding, cutting through the tension like a knife. His gaze was stern, his tone leaving no room for argument. Take a seat. Now. The other officers exchanged bewildered glances, their cocky bravado crumbling under the weight of something they couldn't quite grasp. This was not how things were supposed to go. This was not how their show of power was meant to end. The woman rotated her wrists, rubbing the red marks left by the metal, her expression remaining calm and collected. Her eyes held a focus that was almost chilling in its intensity, and then she did something that left everyone in the room utterly speechless. She took a step forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, and approached the judge's bench. Without hesitation, she walked around it, her movements smooth and confident. And then, with the same steady calmness, she sat down. She sat down on the judge's bench. Hank's mouth dropped open, his eyes wide with disbelief. His partners were no better, their faces twisted into expressions of shock and dread. What the hell is this? Hank sputtered, his bravado shattered beyond repair. You can't just. Oh, I can. Her voice was smooth as glass, cool as winter frost. Because you see, Officer Maddox, I am not the defendant. I am the judge, and this trial, it's only just begun. The weight of her words crushed the air from the room, the truth sinking in like a blade through flesh, and for the first time, the officers who had laughed so freely were the ones being judged. The room was frozen in a state of pure disbelief. The spectators who had come for entertainment were now glued to their seats, eyes wide and jaws slackened. The officers who had strutted in with all the confidence of predators now looked like prey. And in the midst of it all, the woman who had endured their ridicule with stoic silence now sat where she rightfully belonged, on the judge's bench. For several agonizing moments, no one moved. The courtroom's heavy silence became a living thing, oppressive and choking. Officer Hank Maddox's hands trembled ever so slightly as he struggled to form words. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting between the woman and the judge like a man lost at sea with no land in sight. This can't be real, Hank stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. His authority had been his armor, his arrogance a shield. And now, both were crumbling like sand in a storm. What kind of joke is this? You can't. Oh, but I can. Her tone was cool, clinical, with no trace of the fury or humiliation she'd been subjected to. Her restraint was surgical, precise. Officer Maddox, wasn't it? I believe you were the one who insisted on bringing me in here, cuffing me like a common criminal, parading me before this court in shackles without ever checking my credentials. Would you care to explain why? Hank's eyes twitched. He glanced toward his partners, searching for backup, but they were as useless as statues, their faces reflecting the same terror and disbelief. Mark Rollins and Brian Carter looked like children caught with blood on their hands, unable to process what was happening. I don't have to explain anything to you, Hank finally managed, though his voice wavered. You were resisting. You were causing a disturbance, interfering with official business. Is that what you're calling it now? Her eyes were locked on his, sharp and relentless. And what business was that, exactly? Targeting me as I walked down the street because you assumed I didn't belong there. Hauling me in on false accusations with no legitimate charges filed. Tell me, Officer Maddox, what was the official business you were conducting? He floundered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Sweat trickled down his temple, but he made no attempt to wipe it away. His colleagues remained eerily silent, their previous smugness erased by an overwhelming sense of dread. The judge cleared his throat, his expression carefully controlled but clearly troubled. "Miss Daniels, would you care to clarify the situation?" The woman, now identified as Judge Naomi Daniels, allowed herself a small, cold smile. It was a smile that carried the weight of 1,000 battles fought and won, a smile that told everyone in the room she had nothing to fear. "Of course, Your Honor. It appears these officers have made a grievous error in judgment. They detained me under false pretenses, refused to identify the charges I was supposedly facing, and brought me here in chains like some kind of spectacle, all without conducting the most basic verification of who I am." A low murmur rumbled through the crowd. The truth of her words was irrefutable. Procedures had been ignored, protocols trampled upon, and now the consequences were hanging over the officers like a guillotine. The judge nodded slowly, his gaze shifting toward the officers who were visibly shrinking under his scrutiny. "Officers, what Miss Daniels is describing. This is a very serious breach of protocol. Would you care to respond?" Hank's mouth tightened, his eyes darting around the room as though looking for an escape. She was acting suspiciously. We were within our rights to question her." "Suspiciously?" Naomi echoed, arching an eyebrow. "Walking down the street in a suit and carrying a briefcase is suspicious now." The arrogance that had once been Hank's armor had fully dissolved, leaving only his fear and desperation on display. He was drowning, and everyone could see it. Mark Rollins, realizing the precariousness of their position, finally spoke up. We were responding to a report. Someone said there was a woman causing the disturbance. We were just doing our jobs." "Just doing your jobs." Naomi's voice was razor sharp, each word slicing through their feeble excuses. "Would that job include hurling racial slurs, making derogatory comments, and threatening me with physical harm while you dragged me into this courthouse?" Mark's face flushed red, his guilt laid bare for all to see. Brian Carter looked like he wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. The judge's voice turned icy. "Officers, is this true?" Silence. The kind of silence that spoke louder than any confession. "You know," Naomi continued, her voice eerily calm, "I could have revealed who I was the moment you approached me. I could have put an end to your little power trip with a single phone call. But I wanted to see just how far you were willing to go. I wanted to see the full extent of your abuse of power." Hank took a shaky step backward. His confidence had been shattered, his authority reduced to ashes. This isn't fair. You set us up." "No," Naomi corrected him. "I exposed you. There's a difference." She glanced at the judge, her eyes fierce and unyielding. "Your Honor, I request that these officers be detained and charged with multiple violations, including false imprisonment, harassment, abuse of power, and violation of civil rights. Their actions are not only an insult to this court, but a stain on the justice system itself." The judge nodded, his expression unreadable but his tone decisive. "Your request is granted, Judge Daniels. Bailiff, take the officers into custody. We'll be holding a formal hearing to address the charges." The officers' faces drained of all color as the bailiff stepped forward. Hank tried to protest, his voice high-pitched and frantic, but his words were ignored. His wrists were cuffed with the same cold metal he had so carelessly slapped onto Naomi's. Mark and Brian didn't resist. They had already crumbled under the weight of their shame. As they were escorted out of the courtroom, Naomi's eyes remained fixed on them, her gaze unblinking and unwavering. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. The courtroom buzzed with stunned whispers, the spectators murmuring among themselves as they tried to process what had just occurred. The fall of the powerful and arrogant was a spectacle no one would soon forget. But for Naomi, this was far from over. What had happened was a symptom of a much deeper sickness, one that she was determined to confront. And as she prepared herself for what would come next, her resolve only grew stronger. The news of what had transpired in the courtroom spread like wildfire. By the end of the day, the entire town was buzzing with the shocking revelation. A woman they had all assumed to be just another defendant, a woman humiliated and ridiculed before their very eyes, had instead revealed herself to be a federal judge with more power than any of them could comprehend. Hank Maddox, Mark Rollins, and Brian Carter found themselves behind bars, stripped of their badges, their reputations in tatters. The humiliation they had once dished out so freely had come crashing back on them with unrelenting force. And Naomi Daniels, she was no longer a name whispered in derision. She was now a force to be reckoned with. But for Naomi, this was only the beginning. What happened in that courtroom was not just a personal victory. It was a glaring testament to how deeply corruption and prejudice had poisoned the justice system. Her heart was heavy with both anger and determination. If she could be dragged from the street and paraded through the courtroom like an animal, how many others had suffered the same fate? How many others had no power to fight back? The following morning, Naomi sat in her spacious office, her fingers tapping against her desk as she sifted through a mountain of paperwork. Her office was pristine, the kind of place where order ruled supreme. The mahogany shelves were lined with law books and documents detailing various cases she had presided over. But this case, this one was different. A soft knock interrupted her focus. It was her assistant, Marcus, a young man with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He stepped into the office, holding a thick folder in his hands. "I've compiled everything you asked for, Judge Daniels," Marcus said, placing the folder on her desk. "Evidence of misconduct, testimonies from previous victims, reports of abuses covered up by the department. It's a lot." Naomi nodded, her gaze never leaving the folder. "I had a feeling it would be." "Thank you, Marcus. Please have a seat." Marcus took the chair opposite her, his expression both curious and concerned. "Are you really going through with this?" "There's no choice," Naomi replied firmly. "What happened to me was a symptom of a much larger problem. Those officers are just the tip of the iceberg. If we don't confront this now, it's only going to keep happening. I get that, and I support you. But you know what you're up against. The police department in this town has deep roots. A lot of people are going to try and protect them." Naomi's eyes were cold steel. "Let them try. The truth is a weapon more powerful than any badge or title, and I intend to wield it." Marcus couldn't hide his admiration, though it was tainted with worry. "If anyone can do it, it's you. Just be careful. They're not going to take this lying down. I appreciate your concern, Marcus, but I've dealt with men like them my entire career. They thrive on fear and intimidation. What they don't understand is that I'm beyond intimidation." The folder lay open before her, a collection of horror stories all connected by the same thread of abuse of power. It was nauseating. Pages filled with testimony from people who had been beaten, harassed, falsely imprisoned, and silenced. People without the means or the voice to stand up for themselves. Naomi clenched her fists. This was why she had become a judge, not for prestige, not for power, but for justice. And she would deliver it, no matter what it cost her. She spent hours reviewing the documents, piecing together a case so airtight, not even the most corrupt official could dismantle it. Every testimony was a brick in a wall of evidence that would bring down everyone involved. And it wasn't just the officers who had dragged her through the mud. It was their superiors, their enablers, the entire rotten network that had allowed this corruption to fester unchecked. By evening, her eyes were burning from exhaustion, but her mind was sharper than ever. Marcus had already left for the day, his last words urging her to get some rest. But rest was a luxury Naomi couldn't afford. Not yet. The phone on her desk buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. She picked it up and was met with a familiar voice. "Judge Daniels, this is Agent Carter from Internal Affairs." "Agent Carter," she said smoothly, her voice giving nothing away. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I've been briefed about what happened yesterday. Let me just say, you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest. The department is trying to keep it quiet, But this is making waves all the way up to the governor's office. They should be worried, Naomi replied bluntly, because I'm not going to stop until every single one of those officers, and everyone who covered for them, is held accountable. That's why I'm calling. We'd like to assist you. Internal Affairs has been trying to gather evidence against those officers for years, but no one would talk. Not when the entire system seemed rigged against them. But now, people are finally speaking up. That's good to hear. I have enough evidence to bring charges against at least a dozen officers. But I want to go further. I want every enabler, every complicit official brought to justice. Agent Carter was silent for a moment, his hesitation palpable even over the phone. I'll be honest with you, Judge Daniels. This is going to get ugly. The people you're going after have connections. Money. Power. They won't go down without a fight. I don't care how ugly it gets, Naomi said, her voice unyielding. The truth needs to be told, and the guilty need to face the consequences of their actions. Then we'll work together. I'll send over everything we've got on the department. And be careful. They know you're coming for them. Naomi hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair, her eyes burning with relentless determination. They could come for her if they wanted. She was ready. Because this was more than revenge. It was justice. And nothing was going to stop her from delivering it. The pressure mounted like a relentless storm, fierce and unforgiving. News outlets had already caught wind of the incident, broadcasting clips of Naomi Daniels calmly revealing her true identity in the courtroom. The footage went viral, sparking debates on social media, where hashtags like #JusticeForNaomi and #NoMoreCorruption trended worldwide. The local police department tried desperately to control the narrative, releasing statements about miscommunication and mistaken identity. But the damage was already done. Naomi's revelation had torn through the system like a wildfire, exposing corruption and incompetence at the highest levels. Despite the noise and the media frenzy, Naomi remained focused. Her investigation was no longer just about the 3 officers who had tormented her. This was about dismantling an entire system built on abuse of power. And she wasn't alone. The Internal Affairs team, led by Agent Carter, proved to be invaluable allies. They had provided her with surveillance footage, official complaints that had mysteriously disappeared, and testimonies from officers too scared to speak out before. It was more than she had ever hoped for, and it only made her fight harder. Naomi's office became a war room. Documents and files were pinned to the walls, interconnected with red string like a spiderweb of corruption. Every piece of evidence had its place, each connecting point leading to someone higher up the chain. And at the very top was Police Chief Richard Caldwell. Chief Caldwell was the kind of man who built his empire on charm and intimidation. Behind his polished smile and reputation as a community hero, he was nothing more than a tyrant hiding behind a badge. It was his protection that allowed officers like Hank, Mark, and Brian to thrive under his leadership. His power stretched far and deep, infecting not only the department but also the local government. Naomi knew confronting him directly would be dangerous, but she also knew it was inevitable. If she was going to take down the corrupt empire he had built, she needed to be smart and ruthless. On the 4th day of her investigation, Naomi received an unmarked envelope slid under her office door. Its arrival was so quiet, so undetectable, that it sent a chill down her spine. Inside was a single photograph and a note. The photograph was of her parents' house, a modest, single-story home just outside the city. Her parents had always preferred a simple life, away from the noise and chaos of her career. They were her everything. And now, their safety was being threatened. The note read, "Stop digging, or you'll lose more than your reputation." The audacity of the threat enraged her, but beyond the anger was something colder, more precise. Fear was not an option. She dialed her mother's number, her fingers shaking only slightly. "Naomi, sweetheart, how's the big case going?" Her mother's cheerful voice answered. "Mom, listen to me very carefully. I need you and Dad to leave the house. Right now." Leave? Why? What's going on? Please, Mom. Just do as I say. Pack your things and go stay with Aunt Louise for a while. I'll explain everything later. Just trust me. The concern in her mother's voice was evident. Okay. We'll leave right away. But Naomi, please be careful. Whatever you're involved in. It sounds dangerous. I will. I promise. And I'll call you as soon as I know you're safe. She hung up, her chest tight with anxiety. The threat was real, and her enemies were making sure she knew it. But instead of backing down, Naomi only felt her resolve strengthen. They had made a critical mistake. An hour later, Naomi sat across from Agent Carter in his office, her eyes blazing with fury. They threatened my parents, she said bluntly, tossing the photograph and note onto his desk. Carter's jaw clenched. I was afraid something like this would happen. They're desperate, Naomi. You've shaken their entire foundation. They're not going to play nice. I'm not asking them to, she replied coldly. But this, going after my family. They've just proven how low they're willing to go. And I'll make sure they regret it. Carter nodded, his face pale but determined. We'll increase security. Have agents stationed near your parents' house, just in case. And we'll accelerate the investigation. Hit them hard before they have a chance to hit back. Good, because I'm done playing defense. The next few days passed in a blur of strategy meetings, paperwork, and restless nights. Naomi's determination only grew stronger with each passing hour. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when every moment wasted was another opportunity for her enemies to strike. But Naomi wasn't just reacting. She was planning. She had assembled enough evidence to warrant a formal investigation into the police department, but it wasn't enough. She needed an undeniable, irrefutable confession, and she knew just how to get it. Using her connections, she arranged a private meeting with Chief Caldwell. On the surface, it was supposed to be a negotiation, a chance for the department to make amends before formal charges were filed. But Naomi had no intention of negotiating. She wanted the truth. The meeting took place in a lavish office suite that spoke of Caldwell's unchecked power and arrogance. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his smile as slick and false as his words. Well, Judge Daniels, I'm surprised you're not busy filing 1,000,000 lawsuits against my department. Cut the act, Caldwell, Naomi said, her voice cutting through his pretense like a knife. You and I both know why I'm here. Caldwell leaned back, his eyes glinting with amusement. You're overestimating your power, Judge. You may have the media on your side for now, but people forget. And your little crusade will blow over like every other scandal. People like me. We're untouchable. Everyone is touchable, Caldwell. You're no exception, and you've made the mistake of underestimating me. Caldwell's smile faltered, a crack in his facade. Naomi leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. By the time I'm done with you, Caldwell, you'll wish you had stayed out of my courtroom. And when the truth comes out, the entire world will know exactly who you are. Naomi left Caldwell's office with a mind sharper than a blade. His arrogance was a shield, but behind it, she had seen something else. Fear. It was buried deep, masked by his smug smile and calculated words, but it was there. And it told her everything she needed to know. Caldwell was hiding something. Something big, and she would expose it. Agent Carter had arranged for round-the-clock surveillance on Naomi's parents. They were safe, at least for now, but Naomi couldn't afford to be reckless. If she wanted to bring Caldwell down, she needed to build an airtight case that not even the most corrupt of allies could dispute. The next morning, Naomi sat in her office surrounded by stacks of files. The mountain of evidence was impressive, but it still felt incomplete. Then her phone rang. It was Carter. Naomi, we've intercepted some interesting communication, Carter said, his voice tense. It's between Caldwell and a man named Victor Rains. Victor Rains, Naomi repeated, flipping through her notes. The name was vaguely familiar. Yeah, former detective. Got pushed out of the force a few years ago after allegations of brutality and corruption. But here's the thing. He was Caldwell's right-hand man for years. They worked closely on questionable operations. Naomi's eyes narrowed. What kind of operations? Undercover missions that never had official approval, raids targeting specific groups, and according to some of the transcripts we pulled, Rains was responsible for a lot of dirty work Caldwell didn't want traced back to him. But he messed up somewhere, and Caldwell made him the scapegoat. Naomi couldn't help but smile. So Caldwell burns his own people when they become liabilities. Exactly. And now Rains is desperate. It looks like he's been trying to blackmail Caldwell for money, threatening to leak everything unless he's compensated. That's perfect, Naomi said, her excitement barely contained. If we can get Rains to talk, we have our smoking gun. It's a risk, Carter warned. Rains isn't exactly trustworthy. He's a man with nothing to lose and a grudge to settle. Which makes him dangerous, but also useful, Naomi replied. Set up a meeting. Somewhere public. Somewhere he feels safe. Within 24 hours, the meeting was arranged. A rundown diner on the edge of town where greasy food and whispered conversations were the standard. Naomi arrived early, settling into a corner booth with her eyes fixed on the door. When Victor Rains entered, she instantly recognized him from the surveillance photos Carter had shown her. A tall man with graying hair and the kind of roughness that spoke of a life spent walking too close to the edge. He slid into the booth opposite her, his gaze sharp and calculating. So, you're the one trying to take down King Caldwell. Gotta say, lady, you've got guts. I prefer to think of it as doing my job, Naomi replied coolly. You know why I'm here. I need proof, the kind of proof that buries Caldwell for good. Rains let out a dry laugh. And you think I'm just gonna hand over everything I've got out of the goodness of my heart? No, I think you're going to do it because it's your only chance at getting any kind of justice. Caldwell threw you to the wolves. He ruined your career, destroyed your reputation, and left you with nothing. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly innocent, Rains admitted, his eyes darkening. I did what I did because Caldwell made me believe I was untouchable, but he was the one calling the shots. And when it all went to hell, he acted like he didn't know me. Then why protect him? Naomi pressed. Why not let the world see him for what he truly is? Rains hesitated, his gaze dropping to the cracked formica table. Because I'm not ready to be a dead man. Protection can be arranged, Naomi said. Witness protection, relocation, a clean slate. But only if you cooperate. Rains eyed her with a mixture of skepticism and desperation. And if I don't? Then you'll be running for the rest of your life. Always looking over your shoulder, waiting for the day Caldwell decides you're too much of a liability. Because that day is coming, Victor. You know it. And when it does, there won't be anyone left to protect you. Her words hit him like a punch. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. All right, he said finally. I'll talk. But I want full immunity. No charges, no jail time. Just a way out. That's not for me to decide, Naomi replied. But if your testimony is good enough, if you give me what I need to put Caldwell away for life, then I'll do everything in my power to get you that deal. Rains glanced around the diner, his paranoia evident. You got something to record this. Naomi slid a small recording device across the table. Rains stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Caldwell's been dirty for years. Money laundering, bribery, running protection rackets. And when the heat got too close, he'd send me and a few others to clean up the mess. Make sure anyone asking questions either shut up or disappeared. The confession spilled from him like blood from a wound, each word heavier than the last. Naomi listened, her fingers clenched around her notepad. This was it, the key to everything. But it wasn't just the crimes, Rains continued, his voice cracking. It was the cover-ups, internal affairs investigations swept under the rug, witnesses intimidated or bought off, And it all comes back to Caldwell. Every single time. Do you have documents? Files? Anything to back this up? Rains nodded, his shoulders slumping. Yeah, I kept copies. For insurance, you know. Thought it'd keep me safe. But now it's my only way out. Give me the files, Naomi said, her tone firm but calm. And I'll make sure Caldwell pays for what he's done. All of it. Rains hesitated, his gaze flickering between her and the exit. But then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. All right, you'll have them. But this better be worth it. It will be, Naomi promised. I'll make sure of it. The deal was sealed, and for the first time, Naomi felt victory within reach. Naomi held the flash drive Victor Rains had given her as if it were the key to everything. And, in a way, it was. Hours of audio recordings, incriminating documents, surveillance footage, and lists of transactions Caldwell had tried to bury. It was all there, a detailed roadmap of corruption that went deeper than even she had imagined. But it was only one piece of the puzzle. Agent Carter met her at a secure location to review the material. His expression grew grimmer by the minute as he skimmed through the files. This is a gold mine, but it's not enough to guarantee a conviction. I know, Naomi replied. Her voice was calm, but her mind was a whirlwind of strategy. But it's enough to make Caldwell squirm, to push him into making mistakes. And if he doesn't, then we push harder. Carter stared at her, a hint of concern creasing his brow. You know what you're up against, Naomi. Caldwell's not just some dirty cop. He's got connections, power. You're rattling a very big cage, and I'm not stopping until I tear it down. They spent the next few days cross-referencing the files with their own records, building a case that could withstand the harshest scrutiny. But Naomi knew that even with the evidence Rains provided, it wouldn't be enough. Caldwell was too entrenched, his network too broad. But she also knew something about men like him. They were arrogant, overconfident, and that arrogance made them sloppy. The media leak was timed perfectly. Reports of corruption within the police force began to surface, whispers of investigations, and hidden scandals. Naomi made sure the right journalists got the right pieces of information, just enough to stir the pot, but not enough to derail the case. Then she sent the letter to Caldwell, a single sheet of paper with one line written across it. I'm coming for you. The reaction was immediate. Caldwell's attempts to hide his panic were clumsy, his paranoia escalating to the point where he was lashing out at his own men. He made desperate phone calls, arranged secret meetings, and tried to erase any remaining evidence of his crimes. But Naomi was always one step ahead. 2 weeks later, she received a frantic call from Rains. You need to move fast, he said, his voice shaking. Caldwell knows I talked. He's cleaning house. What does that mean? Naomi demanded. It means he's taking out anyone who could be a threat, permanently. And that includes me. Where are you? I'm at my safe house, but it's only a matter of time before he finds me. You promised protection. And you'll have it, Naomi replied, already signaling to Carter to track the call. Stay where you are. We're coming to get you. But the rescue came too late. By the time Naomi and her team arrived at the safe house, it was nothing but charred ruins. Victor Rains was dead. Naomi stared at the blackened wreckage, her fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Guilt twisted inside her, but she forced herself to bury it. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The FBI moved swiftly. With the evidence Rains had provided and the additional files Naomi had uncovered, they were able to obtain warrants for several of Caldwell's associates. The takedown operation was relentless, targeting every corner of his criminal empire. But Caldwell himself was nowhere to be found. For days, Naomi felt as if she were chasing a ghost. Every lead turned up empty. Every attempt to track him down ended in failure. It was as if he had simply vanished. Then, one night, as Naomi sat in her office, reviewing the files for the 100th time, her phone rang. It was an unlisted number. "Naomi Sinclair," she answered, her tone steely. "Congratulations," came the familiar, oily voice of Caldwell. "You made quite the mess." Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "You did that yourself, Caldwell." "I just turned on the lights." A dry chuckle echoed through the line. "You think you've won. You think your little crusade has accomplished anything. I'm still here. And I will always be here. Not for long. You think you're untouchable because you wear that robe and have the FBI watching your back. Power shifts, Naomi. People like you come and go. But me? I'm the system. I've been part of it for too long to be erased by someone like you. Keep telling yourself that." Naomi shot back. "But every system can be dismantled. And I'm tearing yours down, brick by brick." The line went dead. The manhunt continued for another 3 months. Caldwell's resources were dwindling, his allies abandoning him one by one. Desperation made him reckless, and Naomi knew it was only a matter of time before he slipped. That moment came on a rainy night in November. Caldwell was found hiding in a decaying motel on the outskirts of a forgotten town. The arrest was swift, almost anticlimactic, but the trial that followed was anything but. The courtroom was packed, reporters lining the halls, cameras flashing from every direction. Caldwell sat at the defendant's table, his once impeccable appearance now a shadow of its former self. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt. Naomi entered the room with the same calm, composed demeanor she'd worn since the beginning of the investigation. She took her place on the bench, her gaze sweeping over the room before settling on Caldwell. The man who had mocked her. The man who had orchestrated so much pain and suffering. Now he was the one under scrutiny. The one whose future hung by a thread. The proceedings were meticulous, every piece of evidence presented with undeniable clarity. Naomi's voice was firm and unwavering as she delivered her judgment. "Your crimes are not only a violation of the law, but a betrayal of the very ideals you swore to uphold. Justice will be served. And your power, Mr. Caldwell, is over." The sentence was severe. Decades in prison without the possibility of parole. A fitting end for a man who had believed himself untouchable. As the courtroom emptied, Naomi allowed herself a moment to breathe. It was over. Caldwell was finished. And the message was clear. No one was above the law.